Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Sean, and today we are talking about Aldarra, and our copy was provided for review, but the thoughts in this video are all our own.
Aldarra is a 2 to 4 player game, and it is a big game with a ton of airships, lots of dice rolling, and it takes place in this like steampunk world that combines magic and technology. Let's take a closer look at how it plays.
You start the game by choosing a faction, randomizing the hexes to create a map, taking a couple of secondary objective goals and a faction-specific development, and then laying out your stronghold and a handful of units. On your turn, you will place an order token in a region, and then either move your units from that region to any number of other regions, or from any number of other regions to that region. If moving means your units are now in the same region as someone else, you fight. And to do this, you both roll dice at the same time based on the speed and type of your units, comparing successes to defenses, and then removing enemy units if possible. And this continues until only one player has any units left. If you win, you get a point, plus any points for completed objectives. After you move and probably fight, you can also explore by putting down a token and taking a card, which will give you a bonus. And after everyone has used all 3 order tokens, the round ends. You gain coins and crystals from the places you control, buy points if you want to, and then check to see if anyone has 20 points. If they do, they win the game. If they don't, you all get another objective and another development, buy a bunch more units, and then continue on your quest for dominance.
This is a very big game, and we'll come back to that, but part of it being a big game is I expected it to take a while to learn. But I was surprised at how streamlined it was and how simple it actually was to get going and to start playing.
Yeah, it really is. I definitely had the same thought, because you see this box, and this is a real big boy, and we're definitely gonna be talking about that. But you see the box, you see all this stuff, you think, oh boy, this is gonna be like a Twilight Imperium, an Eclipse. This is gonna take some learning. But really, this is like, there's kind of 4 or 5 pages of rules that you're reading for this, and they're all pretty simple. This is a very, very streamlined game. This is really about fighting, about rolling them dice.
And I think what simplifies it is there are 7 different types of ships or buildings, but each of those have something pretty simple that they do. So it's not too hard to keep track of it all. And then a lot of what you're doing is going into combat, and when you go into combat you roll dice, but each ship or building only provides like 1 or 2 dice. So you're usually only rolling like maybe a handful of dice, so you can manage to like do the math and figure it all out pretty quickly.
But even with that, there is still like a lot of nuance in there, because I really like, one of the things in this is when you do battle, you've got 2 kind of levels to the battle. So you've got your light things happen first, like your little guys, they're not as strong, they don't have as good of shields, and then your bigger things happen. And the nice thing is it means that those little guys always have a chance to do something in that battle, because with the dice, they have one of the sides, or in some of the dice, 2 of the sides, that have an explosion, and that means 1 hit plus you roll again. So even a ship with the absolute lowest dice, and they only have 1 dice, has a shot, because they get to go first, and they're going to roll that dice, and they can roll it over and over again, and you're always fighting at the same time too, so it's super quick. Like, I roll 6 dice, you roll 4 dice, we just compare what can this blow up, because nothing takes damage necessarily. You either beat the shield or you don't beat the shield, and it, I guess, repairs, and then it starts another fight. So you beat it or you don't beat it. And I really like that, because it's just super fast.
Yeah, it is nice that there aren't any damage tokens, and what is good too about having the light phase and then the heavy phase is if you want to, you can save your things that are light and not do that phase and add it to your heavy phase, so you're rolling more dice to likely do more damage, but you're missing the opportunity to do damage early. So it's interesting, like, it's a small decision, but it is interesting every time you go into combat as to how you're going to approach it. The other thing that's interesting is where you're going to go into combat, because you want to try and make sure you're going into places that you're going to win. But a key part of that is what the different terrains are on the board, because you always want more money, more crystals to be able to build more things. And so like if you can get onto a gold mine, that can get you 3 coins. So those are going to be highly contested spots.
But yeah, it is important where you're going to get those resources. And that kind of brings us to this is, I think on the surface, this is kind of a 4X game. I think it arguably has all of those X's there, but that fighting X, the exterminate, I think it is that's like 90% of the X's in this game. You do have a little bit of the exploring, because you've got these tokens you can put down. You can take cards when you go to new areas. So like you're not really finding new areas, but it's a little bit. You definitely have the expand. You're building out and out and out. And then the exploit is that mining phase. And then you're putting that money back into your system. And so you're losing ships, buying ships, losing ships, buying ships. And that's kind of the ebb and flow of the game.
One of the big things that changes up is what faction you are, because there are 4 different factions and they have different powers. So they each start with a different type of technology, and those technologies can make a big difference for how you play. But they also have these ongoing powers that will get you playing a little bit differently depending on which faction you are.
Yeah, and I like that they all have those powers, and they all have 2 powers each, but they're not like game breaking. They're game changing, and they're like, they're important, but I haven't felt like any of them are like too overbearing. And so it's stuff like one of them lets you build a free outpost if you have an engineer somewhere. One of them lets you take ships hostage. There's one that lets you take extra, I think, the exploring cards. There's one that lets you take extra technology cards. So they each kind of have a slightly different focus, but it is nice having those different things. And I think also just the like how different they look, how each of those airships look so different and give it like a different feel. I really like that.
Yeah, and you mentioned that one of the factions gets to take an additional development card, and that can make a big difference. It is worth noting that there isn't like a tech tree that you're upgrading and going down different paths. Instead, at the end of each round, there's a certain amount of the development cards that get revealed, and you draft which one you want. So it really is dependent on which ones become available to draft. But then once you have them, they let you like upgrade some of your airships, and that can make a really big difference. Or they give you certain powers, and we found that those technologies can like steer you in different ways.
Oh yeah, those are huge. Yeah, they're called development cards, but they really work like technologies. And all of the, because each of the ships have one upgrade, which is just you flip it upside down. And they get way stronger. Like the little ones give you an extra attack before even the light attacks happen, which can be huge. And all of them have something that is kind of like a pretty big deal, but also the other ones that aren't connected necessarily to the unit, all of them are like pretty big deals, some bigger deals than others. And so there is a little bit of randomness to.
Yeah, we do find we tend to pick the upgrades because we do find those to be quite powerful. And it is interesting because if I have something upgraded, I'm going to want to build that thing more.
Yeah.
And so there are games where I may not tend to build like one kind of ship, but the next game I get the upgrade for it, and then I do. And it will play differently depending on which ships I have available.
And you're only going to get 2, maybe 3 of those a game. So you're never going to upgrade everything. So that is really going to change things.
Yeah, I think the factions and those development cards are the biggest things. There are a few small ones, like when you explore, you get to take an explore card. That might give you free ships or an upgrade. There's also the secondary objectives. So those will give you points if you accomplish them. And like we mentioned before, it can be kind of weird objectives that you wouldn't do normally. So that will get you to play a bit differently. But those are a little bit more random depending on what you get.
And then there's also the map. The map's a big thing too, because when you start, that's laid out randomly. And it gives you a couple suggestions, actually just for 3 and 4 player. 2 player, it's like, go to it. I don't know. But it tells you which tiles you use, and then you can lay those out however you want. And we've tried like longer maps and fatter maps and different ways to play. And it does feel different the different ways you lay out. But I do like that there's the suggestion, but you can kind of mess with it. And we haven't found a way yet where it's really felt like it broke the game. So Aldarra plays for 2 to 4 players, and we have only played the 2-player game. And the 2-player game works shockingly well for this kind of game, because usually these like big dice chuckers where you're all fighting each other, you want to have a lot of factions. But we found it's not really a problem here, and I think partly because the game gives you, so it's very generous with being able to get more of those ships. So you are, just really throwing those ships into battle, but also because it starts with a whole bunch of other ships that you've got to fight, which are they're just sitting there. That still gives you something to fight right away, and it's dice that you've got to fight against, and those do take us out quite a bit too. So,
and I think it is interesting at 2 players because it is your turn like every other turn. So you can try and like set yourself up to know that if you're going to attack them and the other player's probably going to attack you back, that you maybe are set up to like retaliate again. So it is interesting at 2 players. I do wonder how it would feel at 3 and 4. I think it would definitely take longer.
Yeah, this is about a 2-hour game with 2 players, and I think it's probably pretty fair to say this is going to be about an hour a player. And it's not like it's long, because especially at 2, like you say, you're every second turn, but you're involved in every turn. But yes, with 3 or 4 players, you're not going to be in those battles all of the time. You're going to be in those battles, whatever that percentage is. I'm not going to do all the math, whatever that percentage is of the time. And so you are going to have a little bit more, sitting around time. And if you're playing with 4, just know it's going to be a bit of a longer game. It just is. I would assume it's going to be 3-ish hours if you're playing with 4 players.
Yeah, but I imagine it lends itself to some fun chaos, because there's going to be somebody that comes in and attacks and dwindles down the troops, and then somebody else comes for that territory, and then things look totally different by the time it's your turn again. And I think at 3 or 4, there's going to be targeting the leader situation, which can be helpful if you're like last, as if everybody else is trying to stop the person who's in front.
The other thing to know at a 4-player game is just that this game is big. Everything in this box is big, and we're going to talk all about that in components in just a second, but those tiles are big, those trays are big. At 2 players, we have trouble fitting this onto our table. At 4 players, you're going to need a lot. You're going to need like a conference table, but just know you're going to need some space to play this at the full player count.
This is a huge box, and it comes with a whole lot of stuff. There are the giant tiles for the terrains, there's the different cards that you're using, but one of the key things really is the minis. Those look so cool. There are 4 different factions, and each faction has different airships and different buildings, and they are like really detailed, and I feel like each faction tried to like capture a certain essence.
Yeah, each one totally does a different thing. So there's one faction that is kind of like actual pirates, like actual ships. And it's got dirigibles too, and I love dirigibles. So it's got like dirigibles and then these big ships with like actual sails on it. There's another one that's miners, and so those ones just feel a lot more kind of like functional and like a bit more like in the ground. There's another one that feels like a little bit more technological and like a little bit more kind of anime-ish, and then there's one that is just like real sleek. It feels like it's like the rich people. It's like the Naboo of this game.
Yeah, they all look really cool. I will say the first time you play as a faction, when you're building your first type of a ship, you do have to peek pretty closely to get a sense of which one it is. You do pick it up fairly quickly, and even like the more games we played, the more we were able to just recognize the differences in sizes as well.
Yeah, and there's just little things like all of the engineers have like little grabby claws that you can see that there's some functionality to it, and stronger ships are bigger. Like as you think they'd be bigger, they're just gonna be bigger. But yeah, you definitely do have to look at a few of those, especially the first time that you play. But they do a good job of the artwork, all lays that out really nicely. And there is a lot of artwork in this game, and it's pretty solid. Most of the different goals, most of the different exploration cards, those all have different, well, they don't all, but it kind of doubles up on some of them, but they mostly have different artwork on them as well. And it all looks cool. It all helps bring in the vibe of the whole game. So yeah, I think that they've done a pretty good job on everything, but there's one pretty big complaint, and that is just the size of this box. It's gargantuan.
Yeah, it is a massive, massive box. When it got
I'm gonna keep talking.
Okay, when it got delivered, it looked like a small couch had arrived. It was huge. So Sean's grabbing it now. It is this giant, giant box.
Yeah.
So we live in a small flat. We don't have a lot of space for this. It's nice having the big minis, the big tiles, the tiles that make everything look really clear. But storage of this, I don't know where we're gonna put it.
No, we need another bedroom to have this box. I do wish that they had been able to fit this stuff into a smaller box, but the reason why it's such a big box is it's got these really nice game trays that I think help sort everything in a really good way.
Yeah, speaking of the storage trays, they really have put a lot of thought into how everything gets stored. Everything like the tiles and the cards all go on the bottom layer, makes it really easy to take them out, but specifically the factions all have these storage trays. So you just grab your faction's trays, and if you have the space for it, you can just keep everything in those trays, which makes it really easy to just take the ships and buildings out when you need them.
So the first part of the expansion stuff that we want to talk about is just the upgraded bits. And we should have said this way earlier, but we are playing with some of the upgraded bits mixed in there. And so those include, there's like plastic bits for the action tokens and also for the turn order token. And that one's actually really cool. And then there are metal coins that we got with this. There's another set of dice. There are different kinds of crystals. Most of this stuff, to be honest, isn't that necessary. I always like metal coins, but you can really live without it. The one that I do like are those turn order tokens, but again, you could live without that too. They just look cool.
Yeah, the upgraded stuff does look neat, but you don't need it. We also have the expansion. So one of the key things from the expansions is it adds 2 new factions. And we really appreciate the colors because it's green and purple, which is what we tend to play. And they look pretty cool too. They're both like sea-based inspired. One of them looks like much like squids and octopus type style. Another one more of a crustacean style. And these 2 new factions mean that you can play up to 5 or 6 players.
Yeah, and so you can imagine the table that you need for 5 or 6 players. We still like it because they have different faction powers. They just feel a little bit different, and they're in the colors that we like the best. So we really like that part of it. It also includes all the stuff you need for 5 and 6. So that means extras of all the different cards, all the different tokens, but as well as these event cards. And I kind of like the event cards. The event cards, you flip one at the beginning of each round, and then that gives you a little extra thing for that round. So it breaks some sort of rule. And that's just like a little wrench in the works. If you played this a lot, I think those do add something.
But yeah, the key thing really are those 2 other factions. And if you like playing with 5 or 6 players, it does give you that option if you've got a big enough space.
Yeah, if you've got access to a conference room, you can definitely play 6. But I could see people doing that at like a convention or something. And this really becoming like the thing that you're playing on that day.
So on to final thoughts, and this is an interesting one because this isn't the type of game that I typically migrate to. I usually am not too big on like combative games, and those just tend to not work very well at 2 players. But I think because this game, that is all you're doing. Every round you will have money, you will have opportunities to build more stuff. So it's not as heartbreaking to have these things get destroyed, particularly because you're not having to necessarily like spend a lot of time investing in them, that the whole deal is that you are fighting and blowing stuff up. I find that okay.
Yeah, I was very surprised by this game because even when they asked us like, do you want to review this game, I thought, I don't know, this does not look like a game that we're going to be into, but we decided, you know what, let's take a look at this, and I've been very pleasantly surprised by this. We've played this game way more than we expected to, and we've liked this game way more than we expected to, and it really is a head-to-head dice chucker. Like, this is fight, 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 fight. That is the main thing you are doing in this, and it is arguably a 4X game, I guess, but it is 1 giant X and then 3, much smaller X's next to that, because it is all about that, just fighting each other. And so it is that kind of feeling.
And yeah, and I think it rides the line of being not too complicated, but still having enough different things with the different buildings, and they're pretty simple but powerful different powers as well. And I think it's interesting that it does seem to work really well at 2 players, because these type of games tend to work better at more players.
Yeah, I will say though with the complexity, so there will be some players who just really enjoy that like Eclipse, Twilight Imperium, like that sort of thing, and maybe think this is going to be that sort of thing. It's not. This is not going to be anywhere near that level of complexity. This is quite a bit simpler than those sorts of games. And so just go into it knowing that there's also going to be a lot of randomness, because when you're exploring, that part of it is just all random. That's just take a random card. That's going to give you a power. Sometimes that's really helpful. Sometimes it does absolutely nothing because you're not in the position to use that card. And those like ships and buildings, those specific upgrades, you're only going to get 3, maybe 4 of those in a game. So, and it's totally random which ones are going to come out. So it is a little bit hard to like plan ahead and pick and choose what you're going to upgrade, because you just choose from what comes up each round.
Yeah, you have to be more tactical than strategic, just dealing with things as it comes up. And you have to be okay with dice rolling. There is a ton of dice rolling. There is a lot of luck in that. You might have your biggest ship and somebody is able to destroy it with their smallest one ship. And I think that is appealing to some players, but might be frustrating to other players.
And you got to have some space in your closet for this bad boy too, because it's not going to fit on our board game shelf, so we got to find some other home for it. But it is something to think about, especially if you're here in the UK and you just don't have a lot of space. But there is a lot more fun in this box than either of us expected, and we're not the sort of folks who usually play this game, so take that for what it's worth as well. And that is it. Have you played Aldarra? What did you think? And what are other games like this where you're smashing ships together and chucking dice that you would recommend?
Thank you so much for watching. As usual, please like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time for another game.